campus's Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, Mary Coussons-Read. I want to tell you a little bit about her. If I told you everything I could from her CV, I would talk and she wouldn't. So here's a few things. Dr. Coussons-Read joined UCCS in the spring of 2013. She's quickly become a vital part of our campus community as well as the broader community. Mary came to UCCS from UC Denver, where she was Associate Vice Chancellor for Research and Creative Activities. Prior to that, she held multiple administrative and faculty appointments there. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Oklahoma and a PhD in biological psychology and neurobiology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Dr. Coussons-Read has published a book, Leading from the Middle, a case study approach to academic leadership for associate and assistant deans, as well as in her own field, numerous refereed articles, book chapters, and reviews. She is a frequent presenter at academic conferences and symposia and has been recognized many times over with various honors and awards. Besides her impressive academic credentials, Mary is warm and engaging. She has a great sense of humor. She's here to talk with us on the topic of the myth of work-life balance, and I assure you, you're in for a great treat. So welcome, Mary.
And so now that I've silenced my own cell phone, well, I just want to thank all of you for being here, and also thank you for letting me be part of this evening. This has really been fun to get to know some of you who I already know in SPA, and some of you who I do not know yet. But I'm going to talk about the myth of work-life balance. The irony here is that my research area is on the effects of stress on health. And I get a lot of mileage out of that in terms of the work that I do because I'm not particularly balanced. And so tonight you're going to learn some about my perspective on this, some best practices that I've learned that I also teach as an executive coach or did when I was able to do that work, some of the philosophy that I have on this, and you'll probably learn a little bit more about me personally than you ever wanted to know by the end of this. But my title is A Lesson in Platitudes. And as I started to put this talk together, I realized that a lot of the things that we think about in terms of, motivating ourselves about how we're going to move forward fall into this category. So platitude is a remarker statement, especially one with a moral content that has been used too often to be interesting or thoughtful. So we're going to have some of these that are going to be in this category, but a few that I will argue are kind of worthwhile. So I just kind of enjoy having this framework around things. But before we get to this, let's talk a little bit about this idea of work-life balance. So theoretically, work-life balance is this concept of prioritizing efforts between two roles: work, which is our career and ambition, and then life, which is everything else, right? So I think about this as professional and personal. So obviously what we'd really like to be able to do is have those things sort of equally, working on an equal footing all the time. And because the demands of work and life roles are not always compatible, we spend time thinking about how to balance these roles. Or maybe that was just me. I mean, there was a point where I really worried about whether I was balancing these things. Particularly as I started my family and I started my career, I worried about whether I was going to have enough time to do everything and whether I was, being fair on both sides of the spectrum. And in a perfect world, challenges and demands would be predictable and even in both roles over time. And clearly it's critical to attend to both roles to have a full and successful run as a grown-up with a career. So, how's that going? How's that it's going the same, challenges with balance and all that sort of thing. I mean, the bottom line is that, at least for me, that whole thing about being balanced, about it sort of being equally disrupted on both sides of the spectrum really doesn't work. And here's our first platitude. Simply put, work-life balance means that taking time to live life will only inspire your work. It's really simple. But the reality for me is more like that. So I feel like I'm constantly just trying to keep the plate spinning. So the frustration of trying to figure out how to put all those pieces together kind of has led me to this idea that work-life balance is really a myth. So that's what I'm going to spend some time talking about tonight. And it's actually a thinly veiled way of talking about overworking. It's not so much the myth of work-life balance, it's how to keep work in perspective. Because what you're going to hear about tonight is sort of what I think is a culture of overwork that is particularly an issue in this country, and how do we think about putting some perspective around the work we need to do to help keep ourselves healthy and functional. So work and life can be unpredictable. Really? And so that really makes planning a joke. At least that's been my experience. And focusing on balancing can become another stressor. So for every time I spent thinking about, okay, am I spending enough time, with my family? Am I spending enough time doing volunteer work? That became just as stressful as worrying about getting my work done. And the fact is that we're all finite, and we have finite time and energy. And at the end of the day, there's a point at which you just can't do everything well all the time. So I have a friend who has said to me, I'm doing 100 things and I need to be doing 1,000. And what I have said to him is, if you're doing 100 things, you probably need to be doing 10. So that is a classic example of kind of the overwork mentality. Staying motivated to pursue goals at work and life, and in life is daunting, but I'm going to make the argument that it's good to have some goals. And the bigger point, I said I wasn't going to use the pointer, but oh wow, first time I've effectively used a pointer in years. Clarity, flexibility, perspective, and coping strategies are keys to being successful. And what I'm going to really emphasize tonight is this idea of being clear and flexible and having perspective. And we're going to have all kinds of platitudes to help us think about that. But the bottom line, I talked about challenges should be nice and even. So this is from a website that I really love. You may have heard of Successories if you've ever looked at the Sky Mall. This is from a website called despair.com, which is the antithesis. I just love these. So the fact is that this is, the reality more often than not. And those of you who have ever heard me give a talk before are probably tired of this. But the fact is that all of these challenges create stress. And part of what we're trying to do is manage stress. So all this jazz about work, life, overwork, feeling competent, feeling like we're on top of things, really what this comes down to is managing our stress level. And one thing I wanted to mention, this is my research area too, so of course I have to slip some little research thing in here, is that part of what we're looking out for here is symptoms of excessive stress. Now the first two you all know about. When you're under excessive stress, I'm sure none of these are familiar to any of you. Physical stress, headaches, upset stomach, yada yada. Emotional stress. But what I really want to point out is some of the symptoms of excessive stress that fall into the personal category. Don't those all look like things that happen to you when you work too much? Lost time with friends and loved ones, job burnout, isolation, stopping social activities, relationship loss, difficulties in self-medicating. So the bottom line is this whole idea of this myth of work-life balance is that my argument is the culprit here is a mentality that many of us have bought into, that we are obligated to overwork all the time. And that maybe we're not really as productive as we could be as a function of that. And I would invite you to argue with me about that. But for me, at least, I'm certainly not as productive as I could be when I'm sleep deprived and I have been working to the exclusion of everything else in my life. So, this is sort of a platitude, but it's not. Whether you're a religious person or not, I would encourage you to take away the message of this enormous slide, the Serenity Prayer. So I found a company that actually makes a stainless steel ring that has the Serenity Prayer stamped on the inside of it. I have now had and lost 4 of these. I don't know the fact I used them. What does that mean? That's a whole other talk, I'm afraid. But the point being that part of, dealing with this pressure of feeling like, okay, I'm not balanced, I've got to think about work and I've got to think about my personal life, is having a new goal, which is integrating your work and the rest of your life. So this is where this goal thing comes in. Setting and pursuing some goals at work and in life is important, but knowing that they're going to be detours. So I have colleagues in my research area who study compassion, which at first, being sort of a biologist, I was like, compassion. But the fact is, it turns out that teaching people to be compassionate is actually one of the biggest tools that you can give people to deal with stress and to deal with, grief in their own lives, and actually to help them deal with their own problems. And the biggest goal is to be patient with yourself, actually. Most of us who are perhaps wound a little tight, maybe I'm the only person who would characterize themselves as that sort of person, it's really, we hold ourselves to a really high standard. And so this idea of, having a plan, having a goal, whoops, jeez. See, you make a mistake, all bad stuff happens. So you have a plan, you have a goal, and then something happens and throws you off course. The fact is that unanticipated stuff happens, and a lot of it's beyond your control. So that's going to happen at work, that's going to happen in life. And so even if you have a moment where you feel like, oh, I'm doing everything I need to be doing at work, I'm doing everything I want to be doing in my personal life, how often does that last for a long period of time? Pretty much not for a long period of time. Your car breaks down, there's a budget crisis, somebody gets sick, there are a whole variety of different kinds of things that happen that mean that you end up detouring your effort. So when I talk about the myth of work-life balance, it's that from time to time, it's like a scale that's going to tip. So you're going to be putting more energy into one thing over time, but in the end, hopefully it all balances out. I have an extremely cynical colleague who's a neurobiology faculty member who says, yeah, the other way to think about that is that the sum total of everything is 0. I'm like, oh, God. Okay, I'm not talking to you anymore. But the better way to think about that is that, you manage somehow to keep all the balls in the air most of the time, and if you drop a few, you pick them up eventually. So there'll be times where things are off the rails in both spheres. So the other thing that I always used to say was, if things at work are going well, and things in my personal life are kind of a mess, I'm okay. And if things in my personal life are a mess, but things at work are going well, did I just say that?
Yeah.
Oh, the other way around? If things are going well in one sphere and not in the other, then I'm fine. But if both areas are in trouble, I don't know what I'll do. Well, the older I've gotten, I've realized that there are times where things are a mess in both areas. And this is just part of life. And it turns out that the other way to think about that is you realize that you actually have a lot more capacity to deal with uncertainty and change than you thought you did. So this is, I mentioned coping strategies. One of the things that I think is also important is to give yourself credit where you didn't think you perhaps deserved it before. I used to never think of myself as an optimist. But over time, if you don't develop some optimistic tendencies, it becomes a little bit difficult from time to time to keep going. And many of us have been fortunate enough that we have not had real serious trauma or disaster in our lives. And there are plenty of people out there who have. So I still count myself very, very lucky. But the fact is that I'm a little bit better at dealing with kind of the churn than I thought I was. I definitely have moments where I'm in the car at the stoplight, clinging to the steering wheel, shrieking. Not near campus. You don't see me doing that. You have to find a way to process it. But the larger point is to be patient with yourself. that you have to be patient with yourself, treat yourself with compassion, and give yourself a break. Because if you don't, nobody else is going to. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do different kinds of things. And other people put pressure on us too and have a lot of expectations. And if we don't give ourselves the power and the opportunity to make mistakes and to adjust as we go along, then there's no possibility that we're ever going to be able to do that really well for other people. So I would just argue that you need to give yourself a break, but also stand up for yourself and know that you're doing the best you can with the tools you have. I have a dear friend who's a very experienced executive and academic coach who has had an extremely rocky academic career. And she has managed to reinvent herself several times. And she is the one who said to me, I said, you know, how do you put up with these people who just seem like they just don't know what they're doing, they just behave like complete idiots? And she said, you know, I've realized that everyone does the best they can with the tools they have. And some people just don't have very good tools. I'm like, okay, it's all better. So, but the point here about standing up for yourself, I'm going to talk about here in a second. You have to know what your priorities are and stick to those. So, do something today that your future self will thank you for. So this sounds really simple. But the point here is that as you think about how you spend your time, whether it's life or work, think about where you want to be. How is what you're doing now going to impact something you want to do later? So a great example of this is if you have a relationship that's important to you with a family member or a friend or a kid, if you miss that graduation of your high schooler, how are you going to feel about that when that kid goes off to college? Is your future self going to thank you for that? And also, you know, from something as fundamental as health, it's really easy to get up in the morning and say, you know, I should go to the gym, but I really need to go to the office, I need to work. And, you know, years and years from now, you know, my future self will thank me for getting up and going to the pool instead, because I will be healthier. So just keep this in mind. This sounds like, again, platitudes, but some of them are worthwhile. And then this is my favorite one. This comes from my dad. I have to give my dad credit for this. My dad's a retired academic physician who had one of his jobs when he was in academic medicine. He was an administrator. He fired 700 people in one day and had police escorts around him for several days. And so he keeps saying, you know, do you really have your finger on the button? Is your job really so important that if you don't kill yourself, work over that holiday, skip your vacation, miss your kid's school event, is the world going to come to an end? Now, for some people who work in emergency services or emergency medicine, or who are first responders, or who are air traffic controllers, or a variety of things like that, this may be the case. But in higher education, this is probably not the case. If it doesn't happen today, it's probably not going to be the end of the world. So the fact is, there's always going to be lots and lots of work. And if your job's going to be there tomorrow and you don't have to be in charge of the bat phone on that particular day, maybe you don't have to kill yourself. There are going to be times where you have a deadline, you have a grant you're working on, there's a program review that's done. There are going to be times where you have to really bust your tail. But if you're constantly, I'm a chancellor, like one of my previous chancellors, one of the first experiences I had with her, she mixed a metaphor and she said, yeah, we have to keep our ear to the grindstone. So if you always have your ear to the grindstone, ouch, then you're really, something is probably not right. So the question to ask yourself is it really necessary for me to be working this hard all the time? nights, mornings, weekends, holidays, to the exclusion of other things that are important in your life. Work has to be done well and efficiently, but killing yourself all the time may not be the best way to do it. And I know it's a crazy idea, but this has been my personal experience. Sometimes when I have been up really, really late, long hours, even when I have to be, I find that I don't do as good a job. So this should be reserved for emergencies. There's another platitude, but it's got a cute kid on it. And life is a marathon and not a sprint. And this is actually true. And your job is a marathon and not a sprint, hopefully. Unless you're on a limited term contract, and then it's a different story. But anyway, I mean, honestly, just remember that it's gonna be there tomorrow. So this whole idea of, okay, I have to get this done right now. First of all, most things don't get done right away. It takes a long time. And for every weekend, for every holiday, for every vacation, I have a great slide. I'm really excited to show you about vacation. I'm such a dork. But anyway, there's a great, for every vacation that you skip because of work, that's time with friends or in a beautiful place or with your family that you're never going to get back. And there'll be a point in your life where you can't do it. And that sounds really depressing, but this is true. And so it's important to just remember that you've got to, in terms of thinking about balance, it may not be that, okay, everything's 50-50 in balance, but think about the choices that you make and the opportunities. So part of this is about opportunities you have to do things that are important to you professionally and personally, and making smart choices about that. We're going to talk about goals here in a second. So what do you want? And the reason I have those little star thingies around you is that what I want you to think about is what you want to get professionally and personally. Of course, it's in the context of the world you live in. But what's important to you? Do you want to become a U.S. Senator? Do you want to become a college president? Do you want to have 5 kids? Do you want to become a cross-country unicyclist? I mean, what is it that you want? There are all kinds of things that you can want. They may not be the same thing that your boss and the other people in your life want. But if there are a few things that you really want, you got to internalize those and figure out how you're going to get there. And make choices that get you there. Of course, there are going to be detours. But it's okay to figure out what you want, even if it doesn't match with what other people around you tell you. And this is hard. I may be the only people pleaser in the room. Is there anybody else who would characterize themselves as a people pleaser? I want to make everybody happy. But there's a point at which you go, you know what? When I'm old, which I hopefully will get to be, it's going to be me. And I'm going to need to think about whether I pleased myself, whether I got something that I wanted, whether I had the relationships I wanted. So this is why thinking about what you want is also important. It's not to just the exclusion of all the other stuff that is relevant in your life. But don't leave yourself out of the equation. And you have to be surgical then in your focus about how you spend your time. Which means that there's stuff you're going to say no to. This is an uncomfortable thing. You'll say no to job opportunities. You'll say no to committees. That's fun, actually. But you'll say no to things that you would like to say yes to because they will make other people feel good. And you can still say yes to things that make other people feel good, but you have to say no to some stuff. Not everything, but some stuff. And then also there comes some things that you don't do now, but you do later. So this is about choice. And it's about investment. Think about how you use your money. Your time and your energy is the same. Almost probably more important, because you can never get more of your time. You can hopefully get more money, but you can never get your time back. So you have to think about investing that in the stuff, personally and professionally, that's important for you. And stick to your guns. And don't get distracted by the BS that others may spew or unwanted advice. I love unwanted advice, don't you? I know you say you don't want to be a cross-country unicyclist, but here are all the reasons why you should. My cousin did it and he had a great time. So just, you can listen and you can be polite, but you have to stop and think about, is that consistent with my goal? So you just gotta filter. You can be polite. You don't have to say, you know what? Go away. Don't want to hear it. But reevaluate what you want as needed and honestly. And change is needed from time to time and should be expected as your work and life evolve. So again, this is being compassionate with yourself. Okay, so here are some red herrings. My favorite red herring platitudes. Work hard, play hard. Yeah, so this is, where you have like the machismo, chest beating, beer drinking guys who are out like, repelling and all this stuff. So the point here is to define for yourself what working hard and playing hard means. And this gets back to this overwork thing. So, of course it's important to work hard, and it's important to play hard and enjoy yourself. But this whole mentality of, just know yourself and know your strengths and your needs and take care of yourself. So a lot of this is about self-care. And I don't have my aromatherapy thing here, and we're not going to align our chakras, and there's value in, whatever you need to do that is important, but define for yourself what working hard and playing hard means. Don't get sucked in to, again, everybody else's definition of that. This is my favorite. Again, this comes back to, that should be a rare thing. When you're sitting around and people are talking about, I haven't slept more than 3 hours. I've actually found myself saying this recently, which is frightening. So I'm working on sleeping more. But, I haven't slept more than 3 hours in 2.5 months. I know Winston Churchill didn't sleep very much, but he had a lot of other stuff going on. He's heavily self-medicated. But this whole idea of, martyring yourself and, that sort of mentality and that competitive mentality of overworking is typically not a positive thing. So those are a couple of red herrings. This one too. Now, there's actually some truth to this. So, hard work is good, but the work your ass off thing is a little over the top. And this comes back to this work smart. You need to work well. But this whole thing about, go team, kill yourself, if that's all you do, are you really doing your work well? Are you doing it wisely? Do you have the resources that you need? So the machismo work ethic, and this is not a sexist term, there are plenty of machismo women that I know, it's really evident. It contributes to a culture of competitive overworking, and there are studies that show, not surprisingly, that quality and creativity are reduced by overworking and crisis-driven leadership. So this whole idea of, okay, everything is a disaster, and we all have to really, struggle all the time, that ultimately works against the goals of an organization, and typically the goals that we have as individuals. So this coming back to feeling like you're competent as a grown-up, which we hopefully feel like we're grown-ups most of the time, with your career and your life, this can work against that. So some things that are worth considering. So some platitudes that I sort of like. Martyr is not part of your job description. I actually have I have an apron that says Mary Martyr. My mother gave me when I was a teenager. I still have it. But this is the thing. I'm just beating this dead horse of overworking. But seriously, ask yourself, do you get bonus points for killing yourself all the time? Do you really? Even if you're in a culture of overwork, ask yourself if serious overwork, especially when you're doing it to try to compete with other people, benefits your output or your advancement in any real way. And if it does, if that's the coin of the realm, and if sleeping less than everybody else is what gets you ahead, is that really a place you want to be? And think about also, these are really actually important. Think about the example you set for your direct reports when you work like that, or for your students. And do you want to do that? I had a PhD advisor who found me sleeping on the floor on Thanksgiving morning. And he came in and he said, good, that's what I did. You should be here. And so this is, that sort of mentality of, I suffered, so you should suffer too. Is that really what you want to be doing? What message does your overworking send to others in your life? I really want to be there, but I can't because I'm overworking all the time. I say that it's important for me to be with you, spouse or significant other, or niece or nephew or friend, but I can't because I'm working all the time. And then what personal and health benefits do you get from chronic overworking and poor boundaries? This is a question that I'm wanting someone to answer. What are the health benefits of chronic overworking? So these are questions to ask yourself. I mean, there are times where you're going to have to work really hard, but the trick here is not so much work-life balance, it's not overworking when you don't have to, and this is my vacation slide. Now, unfortunately, this is every vacation I have taken for the last 6 or 7 years. And it's really sad. This is from a consulting company out of Michigan, so I can't take credit for this. But this is a classic example of the work, personal, professional conflict. I particularly enjoy the existential crisis. If you go on vacation, after you realize there's more to life than work and you've been checking your email. But this whole idea of porous boundaries and not being able to just unplug is a huge problem. But how many of you, when you go on vacation, still check your email? Okay, really? So some of you don't need to be here. Well, thanks for coming. Great, cool. Why do I have this up here? I just couldn't resist this. This is about regret. So you want to avoid shoulda, woulda, coulda, but sometimes you're going to have it. So hopefully you don't have a lot of regret about stuff you missed, or where you called it wrong, or I wish I should have worked late, or I wish I had missed that dinner with friends, or I wish I had gone to that wedding but I stayed at work. That's going to happen sometimes. But, my mom always says, guilt is the gift that keeps on giving. You just got to let that go. There will be some things you can't avoid missing, but this is the thing that I wanted you to think about here. Think about the things that are really important. So are there some categories of things you really want to try to prioritize? So is it birthdays? Is it anniversaries? Is it graduations? Like for me, I won't miss commencement, because that's kind of what makes it really worth it. Although I don't know what people do to their hands before they come across that stage. Sometimes. But there are some things that you don't miss. So what are the things that are really, for the most part, non-negotiable for you? And then you, in your personal and professional life, and you put those aside, and you really try to make those sacred. Now, once in a while, you're going to have to move on. So, for example, I had an annual professional meeting that used to conflict with my anniversary. And so what I would do is every other year, I would go to the professional meeting and then we would celebrate our anniversary some other time. So, how do you manage those kinds of things? Because it was the one meeting that was really important for my science. So how do you make those kinds of adjustments? So this is one way to avoid shoulda, woulda, coulda, which would be a great Scrabble word if it were permissible, but it's not. So how many versions of the keep calm thing are there? But keep calm and just say no. So what are the things that are barriers to better integration of your work, your personal and professional life, and setting boundaries around your work? So these are some of the things that typically come up. I don't have enough time. I should do this thing. I feel guilty. I need to climb the ladder. Just failing to set limits, not being able to say no. And then the last is comparing yourself to other people. So the sooner you can quit giving a flip about how you shape up next to anybody but yourself, the better off you are. Because really, at the end of the day, we're all, again, just doing the best we can with the tools we have, right? So I would urge you to think about, are there some things that are keeping you stuck in your ability to put a boundary around your work? And then, this is a little blurry, but I had to have some Zen and motorcycle maintenance in here. You look at where you're going and where you are, and it never makes sense, but then you look back at where you've been, and a pattern seems to emerge. So the point here is perspective. It may seem like, at the moment, while you're kind of on the treadmill, or you're at the rat on the wheel, you're going through all the professional and personal stuff, it may not be clear exactly where you're going, but if you have those goals and you have the things that are important to you, eventually you will begin to see that you're getting where you want to go. This is really true. I used to think that this was just BS, but it's not. This is a great book, by the way. But think about that perspective and be patient. Now, I'm not a patient person. I had a math professor who was obnoxious, who actually was a math teacher in 4th grade, who said, patience is a virtue seldom found in men and never in women. Anyway, so I have made an effort to try to become patient. Thank you very much. So understand that some things are beyond your control. Take action to reduce or remove stressors. Break problems down into smaller, more manageable pieces, because some things can seem really, really, really big. Focus on time management and saying no. This next one is hard. Replace negative relationships with positive ones. Have you ever had somebody in your life who really turned out to probably not be a great person to have in your life? Yeah. They take all kinds of different forms. My favorite term is the energy vampire. But, if there are people who are not helping you, or who are kind of in your ear saying, you really ought to work more, you really ought to, if there are people who you can get away from, you might want to think about spending less time with them. And then adopt self-care practices, take care of yourself, develop outside activities, and seek support and advice from other people. And of course, I had to have a Dr. Seuss quote. Today I shall behave as if this is the day I will be remembered. I really like that. And so the point being that being present and thinking about how we exist in the best way we can right now, make the best decisions we can about the opportunities we have personally and professionally right now is really important. And some of the things that keep us stuck are thinking that suffering from stress is a weakness, not talking to people, not pulling on networks, and isolating ourselves. So at the same time that we work to develop this professional persona, part of what we also have to do is think about how we develop as people and the relationships that we develop. And by doing that, we help other people around us develop too. So by talking to people who we work with and in our personal lives about how we're managing some of this stuff and by pulling on them, that creates a whole network of relationships and a network of resources that then can end up creating a whole bunch of other opportunities for professional work, professional connection, and friendships. So just realizing that there's more than one way to get through this stuff, and that you're not by yourself is actually good. So there should be like a groundswell of music right now, but there's not. So now, here's the really cheesy part. So the other thing that I would encourage you to do is to find something that cheers you up. Find something that kind of makes you happy when you're thinking about this. It's important to have something that makes you smile and makes you laugh, and remember that whatever's happening, it will be over. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions, but this is more of a philosophical conversation, a philosophical discussion than anything else. So thank you guys very much for your attention. Does anyone have a question? Yeah.
Mary, how much of this do you think is cultural? And let me give you a little context for where I'm coming from. I have children who are millennials. And when they first started their professional lives, I was very impressed by the boundaries they were setting. So they were not overworking, they were doing all the fun stuff, and I was like, wow, I was not that way. That's really cool. Well, now they're 30, 32, and they're falling right in. Now they look just like I did. And I'm like, wow, you've been assimilated.
Yeah, that's not the word.
Yeah.
I think it is cultural. And I also think that, there's an Americanization of this. My colleagues, my international colleagues, do not work the way I do, for the most part. So I do think that there is a habit, there's a cultural piece, that there's just an expectation that this is just the way you do it. What do you guys think? Would you agree with that, or you have a different perspective on that? No? Yes?
I lived in Europe for about 10 years and just moved back 2 years ago. And when I lived in Switzerland, they had a 36-hour work week. In London, most people work 34 hours. And there was a lot of, like you said, it was more like the millennials, just like enjoying your job and enjoying the people at your job and your coworkers and everything. And it just wasn't so much of a demanding drive towards something. So I do see the difference between the U.S. and Europe, especially.
What else?
I was in Germany for 4 years. I worked with a lot of German civilians. And you had American military, German military, German civilians. And the thought of coming in and working on a weekend, working on a weekend, for German civilians was unheard of.
Well,
Now, they worked their asses off during the day, but the evening or a weekend, it wouldn't even be discussed. On the other hand, I've heard the Japanese and the Chinese work more hours than we do.
Yeah, so I think that's a question, because there are also cultural pieces here where there are people who work in companies where they take lunch and they leave at 4 and they go have beers or whatever, but then there are those of us who never take lunch. We never leave our desks. We go from one meeting to another, and so there's not much time to breathe. And so I guess one question also is, can you show that there is an improvement in productivity? Do things go better? And that's part of the question. And so there are individual pieces of that, and then there are kind of company and organizational and national pieces of that. But yeah, I have German civilian colleagues who are the same way. They're like, I'm playing golf. But then when they're working, they're working. There's no question about that. What else? Yes?
When I was supervising about a dozen people, whenever they would take a vacation, like for a week or two, I would just automatically pencil in that following Monday that they weren't going to be there. And when they would call up and say, I need another day, I'd always tell them, it's in the book.
Can I work for you? That's, yeah.
And I told them the reason why is, I know you're going to call, you don't want to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, on a Monday, you're not going to want to come back.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want you around.
Don't take this the wrong way, but.
So the next time they asked for a week off, it was, oh, and you're just going to put me in for that manic Monday? Oh yeah, definitely. You don't have to call. You're not going to be in.
Well, and so what do you think that did for the morale of the people that worked with you?
They didn't quit, they stayed. It was like, okay, you understand what it's like to come back on a Monday after having a week or two off and being away from the rat race. And yeah, and they were like, oh, it became something they told the new people all the time. But don't worry, you're not gonna come in.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to call.
Yeah.
Then I had people who would always go ahead and come in sick because they never wanted to take any sick time.
That's a good one. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about walking wounded. So what is that? So what do you think about that? People who come in when they're sick?
Martyr.
Yes. Yeah. No,
Inconsiderate.
Yeah. Now I'm not the best about that. I'm trying to get better. Sue has heard me in my office.
Well, after about 20 years, something happened and they found out that the organization doesn't care.
Yeah.
You know, if you're sick, you're sick. And they finally said, oh, we're sick.
Yeah. Because then you make everybody else sick. So that all speaks to that whole idea of martyrdom, and it's like, I'm so sick, I can barely breathe, but I'm here anyway. It's like, oh, thank you.
Thank you.
For coming here. So what else? Yes.
So you talked about kind of adjusting other people's expectations of you and fulfilling things for yourself. What if you've already set certain expectations in one area or another? How do you modify those?
I think you just have a conversation, and you just say, for me to be as effective as I need to be doing this, I've realized that I need to make some changes. And then you do it gradually, and you really pick your battles. So I have had conversations about needing to change my schedule based on different parenting needs. And that is challenging. But when you talk about it in terms of to do what I need to do in my personal and professional life, my schedule has to change, and here's why. Most people are pretty understanding of that, particularly when you're present. When you're present, you're really present. So if you're engaged really completely during that time that you're there, then it's usually not an issue. Now, part of that is relationship building. If you just start a job and you don't have a track record with somebody, and then you say, oh, hey, and by the way, I'm going to need to leave at 2:30 every day, and I'm going to come in at 10. That usually doesn't work. But having that honest conversation about here's what I need and here's why, that usually works pretty well. You comment?
Well, it's kind of, you look at people who are above you and you know they're not really paying attention to what your needs are. An example was we had a group of analysts, and we passed on, they wanted to rename our section. And we told them, don't call us the analytical service section. So they saw that yes, it's a great name, so we became the ass of the department. So we made up donkeys with asses, and we made lemonade out of it. We said, okay, we're the butt of the jokes and everything. So we took it and ran with it. But they wanted to change it, and we said, no, we refuse to let you change it. You named us that, we're keeping it.
Thank you very much.
Right?
Yeah, that's excellent. You have a comment?
I feel like a lot of the conversation we have around this topic has to do as much with the structure of work in the United States as our attitudes towards it. So you talked about kids conforming by the time they hit 30 because they had no choice but to conform because that was the structure of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a fascinating book that I read years and years and years ago that I cannot remember the name of it, but it was about building the computer. And that these people were essentially in a room for weeks and weeks. What was the name of that book? It was fascinating.
Well, what you were just saying made me think about, you hear all these stories about how great it is to work for Google.
Mm-hmm.
And Google has like this compound where they have like everything you could ever want. But you go and you never leave. Because people live there 24/7. It's like a big terrarium for workers. And that's kind of sick. So it's the same kind of thing, it's like a little,
is
little
it sick?
hamster cage for you.
Or have those people realized it's not about work-life balance, it's that they have a core of themselves that's they are truly integrated.
It's the Borg. No, I mean, it's Star Trek show. I mean, but I think that's a good question. And for different people, it's gonna be different for different people at different points in their lives. So there's no right or wrong to this. So, you know, at one point in your life, it may be great to work like that. And it may be the right thing for you, but then it's okay to change it. And so just being aware, a lot of this is being self-aware, I think. So there's no right or wrong answer, but if you feel like, if you have this kind of stress where you're feeling like, okay, I'm not getting done what I want to get done, or I'm feeling like I'm not, I'm doing 100 things and I should be doing 1,000, that's not the right way to be feeling. That means you need to stop and reevaluate. So, but maybe you feel like you're doing exactly what you ought to do. Yeah.
Well, my kids are in the corporate world now, and they saw Mad Men, and they said, "Do you mean that you could drink at work?" They're trying to bring that back.
Woo! So I know that I am cutting into basketball time. I've already done that pretty heavily, so I don't mean to keep folks. I'm happy to sit around and talk a little bit, but thank you guys very much.